Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, you're in for a treat. We're joined by Aidan McCullen. Aidan, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you to maybe introduce yourself. Tell us all about the world of Aidan McCullen. Over to you, Aidan.
How long have we got, man? I'll give you a quick. I'll give you the tweet version. So I'm very, very lucky to have had multiple lives in the life I've had so far. I've had a few different acts. So one of them was I was a professional rugby player for 10 years. I played for Leinster, Toulouse, and I got capped for Ireland, and that was wonderful. The big benefit that gives you is you know that the end is near. So you have to prepare for that end before it's thrust upon you. And so even though that's the case, so few people actually do it that way. But I'd always seen it that way, and I started to prepare for the inevitable change about 2 years out. Also, a huge benefit was I was injured then, so I was living in London, and I started to study businesses to understand where was a good place to go next. And one of those businesses was Nokia, and I picked up a magazine. I remember it was November 2007. The headline of this Forbes magazine: 1 billion customers, can anyone catch the cell phone king? And I was like, that's a really sound bet. And a few months later, the stock was on the floor. The iPhone came out, and it was a whole different ball game. And I got really interested in what I learned that was disruption. What happened when new technologies or clinging to the past was thrust upon businesses, and they were absolutely floored by this. So I got into that. I got into mindset. I worked in digital transformation for a media company for 10 years. Set up, I didn't know that's what that was either, by the way. So I kind of did a job that nobody really wanted to do. And it was so lucky. It was fortuitous, good timing. Did that, worked briefly for the national broadcaster in Ireland as head of innovation. You can tell why I didn't work there for very long. I won't go into that story. That's a whole different podcast. And went into innovation, worked in an innovation consultancy for 2 years, and really discovered that you could come up with the best frameworks, strategies, etc., but unless the culture was right, that they weren't going to stick anywhere. And then I got into organizational development and leadership, and went out on my own, authored a book called The Undisruptable: A Mindset in Permanent Reinvention. That did quite well globally, so particularly in the US. And now I run workshops, I give keynotes, I run the Innovation Show, which is almost 10 years in the running, interviewing authors all over the world every week, deriving as much learning as I can from them. And I really think about that podcast as learning with witnesses.
That's a whirlwind tour right there, Aidan. So we've gone from professional rugby player through to director of digital innovation, through to the national state broadcaster TV show, to what you're doing today. I mean, it's incredible when you think about that. But also planning ahead, right? So, and interesting as well, you mentioned Nokia, right? I mean, Nokia were unbeatable in their heyday. And then all of a sudden something comes out, a new innovation comes out. Steve Jobs and his band of experts come up with this crazy idea that a phone doesn't need buttons anymore, and look where we're at today. So it's fantastic. Now, for people who listen to this on audio, they're not seeing what I'm seeing and what people who watch us on video are, which is this huge bookshelf behind you. So you've obviously got a real fascination now with things when it comes to innovation and learning and business. Where does that come from, Aidan? Was that just something that you got into? Because you obviously got a passion for it.
I would say a little bit of ignorance in that when I became that head of digital, or digital disruption, digital innovation, I was stuck, and I couldn't understand why people were resisting the technologies that would actually help them and be their future. And I looked for help. I turned to the world of books, etc. But also that period I mentioned where I was injured before the end of my career, I started to read, and that's where I stumbled upon that magazine. And just to say something about the Nokia story that's often unknown is that Nokia had developed two brave engineers inside Nokia. I'm sure there was more than two involved. developed a one-touch phone and what was essentially an iPad years before Steve Jobs ever took the stage over in California. They also had a concept of what they called an app store, a new business model, and they were told to focus on the cash cow, which was the Nokia 3310, the dumb phone. And that is something that absolutely intrigued me. And that's why the books behind me are here is to understand why. And the more and more I study disruption and why businesses go awry, it's human fallacy, it's human biases that get in the way. It's creating some type of success, and the success leads to your victory because you become blinded by that success, or you don't want to admit that there could be a chink in the armor and focus on that chink in the armor. And that's absolutely fascinates me to try and understand that. It's a template, Simon. It's everywhere. It happens us on an individual level where even now we know artificial intelligence is going to absolutely disrupt the landscape from an employment perspective, a learning perspective. Even how we do podcasts in the future will be totally different. Yet so few people actually lean into that and try and be an early adopter of those technologies to understand them when we know they're going to be a huge part of our future. And I'm just intrigued by that. And I don't know where that came from. And it's probably just a desire to understand myself more and understand organizations more and hopefully help them, because it's tough for people. It's often driven by fear, that resistance to change. Resistance to change for me is usually fear, or a fear or shame, or not wanting to look silly with this new technology, as you have to take a step forward to take a step back to take a step forward.
It makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that, Aidan. It's a nice segue into the innovation show, right? This is something that you've been hosting. I think you're heading for almost a decade here. It's been going for quite a while, and you've got some fascinating discussions there. Tell us, how did this come about? What's involved for people maybe who need to tune into the innovation show? Because this is going on years now.
Well, it came out of frustration. So the true story is, I was in RTE, I was in the national broadcaster, and I was asked to come up with an idea for what was becoming the RTE player. So essentially the player, like a Netflix player that RTE had, which is an RTE, for those overseas listeners, is the national broadcaster here in Ireland, like NPR in the US, for example. So the whole idea was, I came up with this idea and I had nothing to do with it. It was like, going, look, there's a load of people in Ireland in Silicon Docs, what we call it, Google, Facebook, now Meta, LinkedIn, all these overseas people coming to Ireland, and they have no interest in the content that's on the national broadcaster. So let's create content that's appealing to them. It's about burgeoning new technologies, about artificial intelligence, about biases that block intelligent decision making, loads of stuff like that. And I got oh, we tried that before and it wouldn't work answer. And that, I was prepared for those type of answers, and I went, no, you're not doing this to me. So I went around to a guy who ran the radio. He's still there, great guy, Dan Healy. He runs 2FM in Ireland. I went to Dan, mentioned it to him. He goes, that's a bloody great idea. And he goes, what's your budget? And I was like, no budget, Dan. And and he thinks for a second. And this is the beauty of, there's people like that in organizations that have bad names. It's people who are quick decision makers and who will just get on with the job. Dan is one of those guys. And he said to me, he goes, you present it. And I was like, oh man, I wouldn't know how to present it. And he goes, and at the time I was doing rugby commentary for what was then Setanta Sports on top 14 rugby, because I played in France. And he says, it's just like your rugby crap, but it's different crap. And I was like, I can handle that maybe. So he gave me a great producer, a guy that was then a producer, Alan Swan. He's still there in RTE. And Alan showed me the ropes. And eventually then I took it over myself, started to do it myself. And then I left RTE. So originally it was called the RTE Innovation Show. And I just killed it off, put a bullet in its head, and opened it then a couple of weeks later when I was out on my own. And it was called the Innovation Show. My first guest was Seth Godin. And I decided to actually go with guests that were authors because I was reading anyway. And I was like, oh, why don't I just lean in more into this learning and share that learning? And then during the pandemic, during COVID-19, I started to do video, and then the show totally took off in a different direction once I did video.
Amazing. And Seth Godin, well known to global marketers around the world. I mean, that's a great name for the first episode, right? And interestingly, you said that you saw a huge increase when you flipped to video. Was that just the trend and the way it was going? Because podcasts now seem to be video and audio. Has it made a big difference to the show?
Well, there's a huge, huge, huge difference, Simon. Like the show has, since we've gone video, it's probably quadrupled the size, and it also helps from me from a trust perspective. I think when I'm doing workshops and doing keynotes, that people see you, so they sample you in a way they see that you can actually hold a conversation together. I hope as well. And where that was born out of was crisis. So I was working in an organizational leadership company at the time during the pandemic, and I don't mind saying I was let go from that company. I was let go because it didn't have enough customers to keep the workforce that it had. I was last in, so first out. And because of that, I had time on my hands. And because I had the time on the hands, I started to do video. And then the show took off. I had written the book anyway. The book was coming out, and I wanted to go out on my own. So the crisis, and this is a core part of my work that I talk about, is when there's a crisis coming, and there always is, have some skills and capabilities built up. And there's a great Spartan warrior mantra that I love that I talk about in the book. The more that you sweat in times of peace, the less you bleed in war. So, in other words, do the work when things are peaceful, when things are going well, in order to prepare for an inevitable crisis. Because we all come into them the whole time, but oftentimes in times of peace or in times of abundance, we become kind of lazy. And that's a huge part of my work as well. And just on the Seth Godin piece, I just wanted to tell it Seth's coming back on the show again for two reasons. One is that he has a new book coming out about strategy. But the second is that I'm running an event here in Dublin next year in April 29th and 30th, 2025 in the Royal Dublin Convention Centre. And Seth is a keynote speaker at that event. So you were asking me off air, what am I working on at the moment? I've been working on this event for a long time. We have a huge amount of brilliant innovation thinkers, people that I've had on the show coming over, especially to Ireland, to that event. And it's going to be, it's called the Reinvention Summit. So we're also reinventing the summit or the conference, because it's born out of frustration of, usually, Simon, you know what it's like. You have a load of talking heads and you leave inspired by events like that the whole time. But oftentimes you don't leave with actionable insights. Like, what do I do with that new, fresh information? So we have this kind of new format where it's like you will have a Seth Godin, and then Seth will actually turn it into a mini workshop with the audience. And that's a formula that we're doing the whole time. We have stuff like a fireside chat where we'll actually design the stage at the end of the day. All the speakers that have been on that day will actually have a discussion about their key insights, engage the audience as well. So it becomes very, very much a learning summit as well as just an inspiration summit.
Well, let's just plug that one more time, because that's a not to be missed event. So when is it, and where do people find out more about that, Aidan? Let's get that in straight away.
So it's called the Reinvention Summit, and the website's thereinventionsummit.com. Tickets are available. I maybe on the time of publishing this episode. If not, there's a waiting list there for those tickets to be available. It's on April 29 and 30 next year, 2025, in the Royal Dublin Convention Centre. Brand new, beautiful venue beside Dublin Castle. And we're doing things a little bit different. So we'll have very global audience. So we know a lot of people already. There's a plane of South Africans after chartering a plane from South Africa to come especially to the event. And they're a combination of listeners to the Innovation Show, but also one of my partners in this is a lady called Nadia Jeksenbayeva. That's a mouthful of a name. And there's a reason behind that name as well that she shares openly. But she runs a cohort of people called Chief Reinvention Officers, and she has several books as well. So her, Nadia and I will be co-hosting the entire event, and then it's underneath the hood. There's a team called 9 Yards, and 9 Yards is an experiential events company here in Ireland, and they run event experiences for organizations all over the world, for brands, and they're a partner. So the three of us set up a company called the Reinvention Collective, and it was born out of this, where we're like, there has to be a better way of delivering an event that people come away with learning, not just with new knowledge. So that's the goal of this. So we're trying something new. We're kind of thinking about it like an unconference, in a way that it's not a conference, it's not just a summit, it's something meaningful, it's something that people will look forward to do again. So we're aiming for 700 people. We've booked it for 700 anyway, and looking forward to it. It's taken up a lot of time, but we're very passionate about delivering a meaningful event.
Well, congratulations on that news. I mean, that looks like it's going to be a stunning event. So that's one not to be missed for sure. I
Uh,
want to go back if I can, because you mentioned the book and we haven't really talked about the book. So from somebody who devours books to somebody who's now written the book, tell us about that experience. Tell us what people can find in the book. And what was it like, getting that published, being an author?
so the book was essentially, the book's behind me here. I've been very, very privileged. You know what it's like. You're privileged to have a podcast, get great thinkers on your show. People are giving up their time, and a lot of times these people will be getting 40 and 50 grand, particularly in the US, for an hour of their time to do a keynote, even virtually. And they're giving you this time to come on your show. So it's a huge privilege, and I really think of it that way. So I do take time to read the book each week. For example, at the moment I'm doing I thought it was going to be a 3 part, but it's now, we're on episode 9 on a book called The Emergent Approach to Strategy, with a guy called Peter Campo. And that's really because I couldn't read the depth of that book and be able to do an interview for an hour with him. So I said it to him. I said, look, I really want to learn more about this. I want to go deeper. If you're on for it, I'll read a chapter a week and we'll come together and we'll do an interview on it. So he said, wow, okay, I'm cool with that. So that became a kind of a model, really deep dive into books, and in bite-sized chunks. And then even an hour is a huge investment of someone's time to learn. When you're trying to learn like that, it's a lot of time. So I've been reading books like that for almost a decade, and I felt that a lot of people are time starved, as you know, which is why podcasts are kept short mostly. But that wasn't translating through to books. And it was one thing I did learn from Seth Godin, was keeping the format short. And I wanted to create a book about innovation to make it accessible to people. So, I mean, I even went so far, I hired a guy called Fintan Tate, who did children's books illustrations. So he used to do scribe at events that I was at. He'd do these beautiful graphics for people to take away from those events. And I asked Fintan, would he do some illustrations from a book? So I did this book, and it's full of analogies and metaphors to make innovation accessible to people. And really, that's the drive of my work, is to try and translate what is often perceived as esoteric or high-end language that people cannot connect with. And if I can find stories or analogies or metaphors for people to go, oh, that's all it means, then you've done a good job. So that's what that book is about. It's about change on a personal level, and actually change on a personal level is what stops organizations from changing, because organizations are just hundreds of people brought together, thousands of people in some cases. The more people, the more complex, etc. So this is why I call the book Undisruptable: A Mindset of Permanent Reinvention for Organizations, Individuals, and Life, because I talk about all those things in it. And this idea of permanent reinvention just means that with the rate of change the way it is today, there is no safe haven where I arrive and I'm like going, oh, great, hang my hat on that. This is the job I have for the rest of my life. because technologies change, because things are digital more, and once they become digital, they move into the exponential change space, and things change at an exponential rate. And something that you thought was a solid state, steady environment is totally flexible today. And the rug can be pulled from under your feet very, very quickly, like we saw with the pandemic. The pandemic for me was a warning shot across the bow for so many people to go, that's the new world that we're in today. We have been born into a world post World War II that's been pretty steady and pretty reliable and dependable, that you knew that I can be educated. This will happen. I'll work inside an organization, maybe 5, 10 years. I might change organizations twice, 3 times in my lifetime. But for new generations coming through, they might work for 2, 3, 4 organizations concurrently as gig economy workers, as consultants, and they need a different set of skills there. They need resilience, they need sales skills, they need presentations, storytelling skills. There's different skills that are required there for that new normal. So this is the type of stuff that I talk about in the book, but both on an individual level and an organizational level.
It makes complete sense. I totally agree. And I mean, undisruptable. I mean, it's the perfect title, right? And I think you nailed it, Aidan, because you know the world is different. It's moving rapidly. Technology continues, and whether it's back to that Nokia story or just being able to adapt, to thrive, to reinvent, to innovate, it makes an awful lot of sense. Now, look, I've got a few other questions I want to ask you, but I cannot let the subject of rugby go. So I'm gonna have to ask the question. I know you've been asked it many times, but look, from France to Ireland to playing rugby, give us the story. Tell us about your experiences. What did you love about it? It was obviously a huge passion. How did you get into it? And obviously, you know, from Irish rugby and Leinster over to Toulouse and everything in between, it must have been a phenomenal journey.
It was incredible, really. I have a different story though. I mean, my story isn't your typical. I always wanted to play rugby. My story was I was pretty poor at most sports, so last picked in the playground type kid, and tried to play Gaelic football, tried to play soccer, hurling, all these things. Wanted to go to a Gaelic playing school. So Gaelic, for those people who are overseas, is our national sport here, Gaelic football. Wanted to go to a school that was one of the top schools in that in Dublin. And my parents wanted me to go to a private school, which was Castleknock College. And I don't know how they afforded to send us there at the time. So my dad does this, makes this sacrifice, sends us to this Castleknock College, and we do pretty well in the 5th and 6th year that I'm there, and I'm on the senior cup team. So there was a tour to Australia for the Leinster schools team, and the guy who was the coach of that told me I was the last name on the team sheet of 40. And the only reason they picked me was actually because the school had done so well that year. We got to the semi-final the 2 years I was in the senior cup. So we go along, and I end up becoming the player of the tournament. I get voted player of the tournament. And because of that, then come home and I get put into what was the newly formed Irish Academy. So for emerging players, or what they thought were high potential players of the future, there was only 10 of us. And what we got was a program for the summer and a bit of free stash, free gear, pair of runners, pair of boots. So we like, this was gold for us back in the 90s. So we were like, wow, felt absolutely great. And the huge difference that I realized in myself looking back is I did the work. I just always did the work. Because you asked me about writing the book. What was that process like? I treated the book the exact same way I treated rugby. I showed up, I did the work. Every day, wrote a little bit. Every day, showed up, no matter what, hail, rain, snow, did the work the same as I did back then. So when we first tested, so they tested at the start of the summer and they tested at the end of the summer. Tested at the start of the summer, I was the worst on every metric: bench press, fitness, sprint test, power tests. Tested at the end of the summer, I was the best on 2 of those 4 metrics. The next summer, three of those four metrics. I never quite mastered the speed because there was guys there much, much faster than me. But I just always worked. And then I went to college. I did French and German in Trinity College here in Dublin. And this is the serendipity. And I tell kids this all the time, Simon. There's so much luck involved. And all you can do is work on the inputs. You cannot control the output. You, unless you're highly, highly talented or highly, highly gifted, you really don't have much control of your destiny when it comes to any kind of sport like that. All you can do is the work and have a vision. And what happened for me wasn't that I wanted to be a pro rugby player. I saw a guy in my class, a guy called Barry O'Rafferty. He was a mature student in my Trinity class, and he said to me one day, he goes, "Aidan, your written French is great. Your spoken French sucks. It's terrible." He said, "I recommend you go over and do Erasmus," which was this opportunity to go abroad and study abroad. So he said, "Also read the bloody paper, will you?" And he gave me a copy of this paper, French newspaper called L'équipe, which just means team in French. I put it in my bag, left it there for months. It was tattered, it was in bits. And one day, the bus on the way home from training broke down. And I was sitting on the bus as they were waiting for a replacement bus to come along. And I pulled out this tattered, old, worn piece of newspaper. And on the page that it was open, it said Dax en crise, which just means Dax in crisis. And Dax is this team in the south of France. It's a town in the south of France near Biarritz. And I found out that most of their players had actually left. So I hatched this plan that if I went to France, I could possibly get a contract there and take my Erasmus year as a professional rugby year. So I asked a guy who was Donald Spring, who was a coach in Lansdowne Rugby Club, did he know anyone there? Turns out he knew the president of this club, Dax. So this is the kind of the incredible serendipity that happens, but you have to be willing to actually put yourself out there. So I end up there, did a year there, and because I'd done a year there, my spoken French came on brilliant. I aced my exams, got first class honors in French. But then I finished French, I did German as well, and I wanted to do a postgrad. So I went to the Smurfit Business School, did business there. And during that year, I had been player of the year in what was the AIL. I think it's still called All Ireland League. It was a professional. It's a semi-professional kind of standard that feeds the provinces in Ireland, the professional clubs. And during that time, it was only in a few weeks, a guy in Leinster hurts his knee, and I get called up because I had been a professional player and because I'd had that good season beforehand, and that's how I got in. And it's incredible. I mean, and this pattern of sometimes the crisis helps you, sometimes it pushes you in a different direction, is a really helpful way to think about things, because a crisis happened again. So I get into Leinster. I'd only been playing rugby like 6 years at that stage. And a year later, I'm capped for Ireland after having a brilliant year through other people's injuries. So get into the team through several injuries, get into the Irish team, get capped over in Samoa. Then I got injured again. It's come back to Leinster, struggled with injury, didn't get picked really that much under that new coach, a guy called Declan Kidney. He didn't take to me so well. So again, I was so devastated by that. But if it wasn't for that crisis, I wouldn't have ever looked in my journal, which I had written when I was in France, the time when I was 21, that I wanted to play for Toulouse. If I wasn't a regular in the Irish team by 28, I was just turning on 28. And I read this in my thing, and I started to put out the feelers for a French club. And lo and behold, Toulouse offered me a contract. I end up there. And that was the dream. I mean, for me, I saw Toulouse play when I was 21 playing in Dax. And I couldn't understand how amazing this style of rugby was that they play, because they play in a totally different standard, totally different culture of rugby. It's like an art, and it's just so hard to get your head around. And then years later, I find myself playing there, and more than playing, I was first choice in the team. I was in that team for like almost 6 months, and then injury hits again. did my knee and really struggled for the rest of my career and didn't really get back. Ended up in London. I was broken by then, though. I was 18 months. I was there for 2 years, and 18 months of that I was injured with the knee as well. So that was kind of the end of it for me. But incredible journey, and learned so much, made so many great friends, great experiences as well. So very, very privileged to have had that experience.
It's a phenomenal story, and thanks for sharing that with us, Aidan. It is it just shows you how life has these twists and turns, doesn't it? And
Absolutely.
from the tattered news article through to putting yourself out there, and as you say, quite rightly, it all started somewhere with having to put the work in, right? And then from
Always the work,
DAX
man.
onwards, it just keeps going, right? And as we find ourselves here today, we've obviously got new things happening in the world. Of course, Toulouse still synonymous with rugby. Irish rugby, as you know, never been as popular, and the sport continues to grow. But thanks for sharing that. It's really insightful to get your views on your career as well. And look,
Absolutely. And
I
one thing
couldn't
just to,
not, I couldn't not ask Aidan.
one thing to add was that you're asking me about this. I think understanding yourself more, it helps me now. I have kids, and I see this with my older son. So he's 14. He does MMA and jiu-jitsu, and he's really into it. He absolutely loves it. But I see in him what happened in me, because you're like, on where did it come from? What actually happened for me was a little bit of ego. And by that what I mean is, so if you picture, I was like unnoticeable, unremarkable, as Seth Godin would say, for a long time as a sports person. And then around 16, I start to train. The training pays off. I get noticed. I do more training because of that positive feedback loop, get more noticed, start to get recognized in playing for Irish schools, Leinster schools. And that can get into you a little bit. That can get into your ego of people recognizing, go, oh, you're actually really good at this. And all of a sudden, the kid inside you that's been kind of overlooked or neglected for such a long time goes, see, we're worth something here. And I see that same pattern happen with my son, because he was the same. He was non-sporty for a very, very long time, and then got into this sport, got into Krav Maga, jiu-jitsu and MMA. And everybody in his class were like, going, whoa, you're really strong. He trains hard. This summer he trained really hard. He even worked in a gym to be able to train there when during his breaks. And he's only 14, and that loop is starting to get, and I see it now from the outside and go, so that's a little bit what happened as well. And they're the stories you don't hear. Like, they're the stories that there's always some reason behind somebody's spark. Or even with the show, that's why I say with ignorance is that I felt I was lacking a bit of knowledge, maybe because I'd had a 10-year career in rugby, and I needed to catch up with people. And that's why I studied so profusely about business, how to run meetings, how to communicate effectively, how to write effectively. Because I thought everybody had been trained in all this in businesses. And then I came in, and I remember when I started, and I was like an unpaid intern at 31, came in with agendas, passing around agendas, and people are looking at me going, who is this jackass with his agendas? So yeah, so there was a little bit of that naivety that was a driver for me as well.
So it brings me on to something that I want to ask you before we run out of time here, and that's obviously about edge behaviors, right? And I'm gonna you come up with a great quote earlier, but there's another quote that I'm sure you're familiar with, um, which is the incumbents miss these behavioral shifts, right? Because the behavioral shifts take root, don't they? Not among mainstream, as the saying goes, but at the fringes of the market. And I know in edge behavior and the work that you do there, you're talking about the trends that are maybe just around the corner. They're just slightly out of sight, the edges of society. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so the term edge behavior, where I kind of derived it from was, there's a quote by sci-fi writer guy William Gibson, and he said, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So if you think about, for those people just listening to us, a spider diagram. So it's a circle, and then you'd have certain points along that inside the circle. So there's circles within inside the circles, and you would have different points around that circle to refer to mobile saturation or AI saturation or whatever the metrics are. You use them a lot in marketing. That when you create that diagram, it looks like a spider web, and some of those edges don't touch quite the edge yet. And that's the logo of the business. And the reason that is that people often miss what happens at the edge because it's not yet mainstream. Not all of those things become mainstream, but they're signals, and they're what's called a weak signal in innovation. And when you're so focused on the day-to-day, on what we call innovation, exploit or explore, when you're so focused on exploiting your current competitive advantage, you can miss subtle trends in your industry, like Nokia did, of people wanting a different dynamic of, they don't need a dumb phone anymore. They actually would prefer to have a computer in their pocket that happens to be able to make phone calls. And like the original iPhone didn't do that very well. It didn't even, the first launch, it didn't even have text messaging. That was a software update that came afterwards. Even on the stage, the phone didn't work effectively when Steve Jobs first tried it. And incumbents miss those trends because they're so focused, and a little bit of cognitive dissonance where it's a little bit like hear no evil, see no evil. I don't want to know about those trends because I'm making progress on this line of thinking or this product suite that I have. And if you're telling me I have to back up and retool the entire organization mentally and physically to be able to do this new type of product that people are asking for, oh, that's a tough decision for me. So that's what edge behavior is. It's paying attention to the subtle changes that happen, the weak signals that happen in an environment, and not ignore them, which is what most people do. And then, most importantly, Simon, the people inside the organization, mainly my clients, the people who listen to the innovation show, are those people who are shouting from the rooftops about these weak signals. Clients want something different. Customers are leaving us, or they're going to leave us, or there's this new startup over here that created a product. They're going to absolutely tear us apart if they get into our customers. And people will, what will they do? They'll go back to their customers and ask the customers, and the customers will do what Henry Ford recognized. They'll ask for a faster horse. They'll always ask for a better version of what you're already giving them, until somebody produces something that's totally different, that actually the customer goes, oh, I never thought about that before, and it's cheaper. And they all shift there. And that's what disruptive innovation is.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I like that a lot, Aidan. And when it comes to inputs, going back to that word that you used a little while ago, you also, I know, sit on a few boards. I know you lecture at Trinity College Dublin and that, but obviously you have to balance your time and the bandwidth that you have. But is that an important part of your mix, sitting on boards and being part of the educational side of things too? Does that play a part in what you do?
Yeah, well, it's a good point about the inputs. What it does is it keeps you, like, and a term we used in rugby was always keep them honest. So, I played number 6, and you would, like, always watch the number 9, which was a really fast guy, smaller guy, usually, that would just smoke you, especially me, because I wasn't that fast. So he'd smoke you on the outside. So you'd always keep him honest and tug at his journey and just be looking at him and threaten, threaten him. Don't you dare try and come around my side here. And what it does for me is just keep me honest, in that having the edge of in touch with students. So these are MBA students that I teach in Trinity College. They're giving you feedback, and it's different feedback than you would get from working with a corporate audience. So that's a really important thing. Also understanding what's preoccupying them. What are they worried about at the moment, or what opportunities are they seeing that I'm missing at the edge? Because the more inputs you have, the more you can be able to spot edge behaviors. And then finally, the board. So I'm on the board of the National Broadband Ireland, which is amazing, amazing goal. I mean, it was started 5 years ago, and they've just passed the milestone of rolling out Wi-Fi as good as you'd get in any city in a place called the Black Valley in Ireland, which was only got electricity in the 1970s, I think, or maybe 80s. It was like the last place in Ireland to get electricity because it's so deep in the countryside and it has valleys, hence the name Black Valley. So being part of that's been amazing, and to understand the board level perspective. So it's kind of like when you're a player in sport, you see everything through the lens of a player. And it's not until you coached, which I did later on, I coached Lansdowne Rugby Club, that you start to see things from the coach's perspective. And if you knew that perspective as a player, there's certain things you probably would have done differently. And it's that multi perspective view that actually helps you with your cognitive diversity, so you can actually give a more holistic view of something, and it makes you a better consultant then as a result, because you understand things better as a student, as a board director, as an executive from my time being an executive, and then reading widely and eclectically as well. And you start to get a better view of the world that somebody else might not see. And really, I think that's what people hire you for, as a keynote speaker or as a consultant, bringing in a different view. And that view sometimes challenges the view that's a long held view inside an organization. And that's really the job, is to bring new thinking and change how they see the world so they'll actually have different outputs.
I love that. I love that. Thanks so much, Aidan, for sharing that. Look, before we wrap up, you're obviously planning, you've got a lot of work ahead with this huge event that you've got coming, which is very exciting. But how does planning work in your world? What are you thinking about over the next 6, 12, 24 months? How does that work in your world at the moment?
So I'm always busy in that the show keeps me busy the whole time. I write a weekly article called The Thursday Thought, which is a LinkedIn newsletter, a Substack newsletter. And I'm writing a new book at the moment. So a second book, just signed up with a US company called Gray Miller. So they're my new representatives from the book perspective and also from speaking in the US. And have this event, like you said, have multiple series that I'm bringing out on the show. One of them is a guy called Gary Hamel, who there's these brilliant thinkers, Simon, and the world moves on from them. But it doesn't mean that their thinking isn't still unbelievably valuable. And Gary Hamel's book, I think that I've 8 of the books there behind me. So I'm systematically going through an episode. And the thing is, I don't want to be too demanding with these brilliant people. So 16 episodes. So 2 episodes per book over a long period, which will take you a whole quarter of a year to get through, So that's stuff I'm bringing to the innovation show. The my own work, I keep advancing that every week because you're learning new content. So you keep advancing your keynotes, you keep advancing your workshops, and yeah. So and then, as you said, the reinventionsummit.com, that's taken up a hell of a lot of time, particularly because it's year one. But one of the things that's interesting is it's not our year one event in a way, because the three of us, 9 Yards, have been doing events for decades. I've been speaking at or running events for a decade, and my colleague Nadia Jeksembayeva, she's been doing it for 2 decades. And bringing that together, that wealth of experience, and again, that thing, the different perspectives and the different skill sets will lead to something remarkable.
Oh, it's incredible. I think Gary Hamel wrote, was it Humanocracy or
That's
something like
right.
that?
Yeah.
Was that one of his books?
There, look, just so people know, it's a real
Yeah, yeah, I'm
library. Yeah, that's
familiar
it.
with
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So that's the last book we're going to cover. And Gary, he's a new version of it coming out next year. So
Mm,
we'll end just as that comes out. So it's perfect timing.
wonderful, wonderful. And look, finally, is there anything else you'd like to share with our worldwide audience? It might be something we've already touched on that you want to expand on, or maybe something completely new. But what about your parting thoughts for us?
Well, just we are in a time, I think it's a inflection point in society. I really do think that, and beyond all the political stuff and all that, I mean, that's always going on. But I do just think, and this is part of my new book, is that things aren't going to go the way you think they're going to go, but it doesn't mean that it's a crisis. And when things are going well, be building new skills. Like look for the edge behaviors in your industry and become the expert in that. Like you can become an expert by doing the work. Like there's nobody stopping you, particularly cognitively. Like you can be limited in a sport by your physical prowess, but cognitively you can be the expert and go for it. Like I just, it's one of the passions of my work is to try and encourage people, go for the thing, find something you're interested in. You have to be interested in it, otherwise you won't do the work, you won't keep showing up. But go for it and learn it, and don't sit back and relax when things are going well. That's the time when you have a little bit of luxury of time, because if you wait for the crisis, your mindset changes. What actually happens is blood is diverted from your forebrain, which is responsible for sound decision making, to your fists for fight and your feet for flight. And as a result, you become less intelligent. So make decisions and learn when things are going well, because that's the best time to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've had somebody say to me many moons ago that we often make our worst decisions when everything's going right. Right. And it's that old saying, isn't it, as well? The best time to repair the roof is when the sun's shining. And I really like that. So thanks very much for emphasizing that sort of approach to thinking, particularly when things are going well. That's when we kind of maybe should be doing a little bit more deep thinking about where we're going and what's next. Yeah. Look, finally, if people want to connect with you, they want to find out about the event coming up, they want to get the books, they want to tune into the show, where's the best place to point people to at this stage, Aidan?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn with the weekly newsletter, and I share excerpts from the innovation show. The summit is the reinventionsummit.com. So you'll find that there. It's the only reinvention summit in the world. And then the innovation show is the innovationshow.io. And the reason I pick IO is I think about it as input, all these books behind me, and output, then creating the show as a result of all those books.
Love it. Well, look, that brings us nicely to the end of this episode of the Global Discussion. I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to Aidan and I around the world. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe to everything I need you to do to help support the show. And of course, go and check out this wealth of information and great work that Aidan's involved in. And I hope you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Aidan. Aidan, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today.
Great to join you. Thanks, Simon.